On to the second of our panel discussions titled Heroines of Peace. Jeremy, why Heroines of Peace?
Well, approximately 95% of violence that globally happens it happens in our homes, schools, communities, and places of work. 95% in the homes, schools, communities, and places of work. Peace One Day has been working with women's organizations around the world to highlight this critical issue for many years. Peace Day is all about reducing violence. That's what this is all about. And so we wanted to bring this panel together to look at how we can all become involved in reducing violence against women globally. And we are incredibly fortunate today to have with us a powerhouse of women whose ambitious actions are changing the way we think about building peace.
Leading the panel is Valerie Keller, who is co-founder and CEO of Imagine, a newly created B Corp focused on driving transformational change at leadership and business level to achieve humanity's global goals.
Yes, and joining her is Angela Cretu, the CEO of one of today's sponsors, Avon.
Her Royal Highness Princess Lara Faisal, founder and managing director, Rise for Good.
Yeah, Gida Anani, founder and director of Ambad.
Elwha Elman, Chief Operating Officer at Elman Peace Centre, and Amine Elman, Head of Planning and Strategy for the Somali National Armed Forces.
And Dr. Najat Malala Majid, who is Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General on Violence Against Children.
I want to say welcome to our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. And Valerie, over to you.
Welcome to the Heroines of Peace in our conversation here today. And thank you to Jeremy Gilly and all the Peace One Day, and to all of you who are waking up with us all over the world, giving some of your time virtually because you care. Our conversation right now is going to be with the heroines of peace who are looking and on the front lines of women and gender-based violence all around the world. And I'd like for you to welcome to our panel, and we'll go ahead and introduce them here and then have a conversation together about why we're focusing on women and girls and what is it that we collectively can do to end gender-based violence and advance peace in the world. Please help me in warmly welcoming Angela, the CEO of Avon, who's waking up very early with us in New York.
Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone.
Hello, Angela. Good to have you with us. Thank you so much for Avon and everything that you were doing already to help make this event possible, and for everything that you're doing with your life all around the world. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Najat, who is the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General on Violence Against Children. Good morning. Welcome. Good to see you. I only gave her first name because when we were chatting backstage, she says, you know, it's easier just to say my first name. And then she said, you know what? Najat means safety, not an accident. Thanks for being that and for all you're doing on that. We'll come back to a great conversation in a minute. Please help me warmly welcome Her Royal Highness Princess Lara Faisal, who is joining us this morning from Amman. Hello, Lara. Not to be called Her Royal Highness or Princess, although we think she is in many ways, for what she's done, serving as the founder of Rise for Good, focusing on what really matters. I love the name of this and the idea that we can be in Congress and in dialogue. And what we're going to talk about is the Global Girls World Cup as well. Thank you, Lara. Good to be with you.
Valerie. Thank you all.
Pleasure. Also, we have with us Gida Anani, who is the founder and director of Ambad, and speaking about women who can help to influence policy that can then shift the rules of the game for everyone. Gida, welcome. It's good to have you with us, and we look forward to hear about #Undress522 and what you were able to do in Lebanon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm good to be among you all.
Yeah, pleasure. Also, I'd like to welcome, please, Amine Elman, who is the head of planning and strategy for the Somali National Forces. Great to see you, and looking forward to our conversation. And also, someone who also works very closely with her sister. I can attest to the power of that. Welcome Elwha Elman as well, who is joining us. Hello, Elwha. It's good to see you. And good to have you here as the COO of the Elwha Peace Center, and to spend a little bit of time together with you as well. Thanks for making it possible. Yeah. So to help kick off our conversation here today, I think it would be good just to set a little bit of the context for why we're focusing on women and girls. And of course, no matter where we are in the world, we are one tribe, but statistically, 1 in 3 of the humans who happen to be born into a body that looks like this, a female form, is more likely to experience violence. I've experienced it, and I'm sure our other panel members have too. And UNDP last year alone said 243 million of us, humans who showed up in this form, were traumatized by sexual and physical abuse last year alone. Guys, that is the same equivalent of Brazil and Indonesia's population, more than. And COVID, of course, has made this worse. When I put my key into the door here to come in, I felt a sense of relief when I was going into lockdown that I wasn't going to be locked in with my abuser. And as someone who used to lead women's and children's shelters, I knew all too well that women were going to be locked in with no access to the shelters and to the programs and to the initiatives that would help to free them. And we've seen that around the world, that people were isolated with less access. We saw that in France, the rise went up from 30% of reaching out for assistance. In Argentina, 25%. In Singapore, 33%. So you can see that on average, it's gone up. But COVID made it worse in other ways. Because if we think about these women and girls who are experiencing this, they are most likely to be the ones that are impacted by climate change, by food insecurity, biodiversity loss, racial inequalities, economic inequalities. So they are being hit and hit and hit. And when we think about the global goals, and we think about goal 5 for gender, or goal 10 inequality, goal 16 peace, we're thinking that inequality and injustice are what underpins and therefore can undermine the global goals. Our world will not work without dignity and equality for all. That's the conversation that we're in today, is how do we create that world with dignity and equality for all? Looking at how do we end gender-based violence for the half of us that happen to show up in the world in a form like this. I'm going to turn now to those heroines that we introduced you to earlier. We're going to talk a little bit about what are the drivers of this, what's the progress that's being made, and very concretely, what are actions that we can then be taking around the world. Angela, can I come to you there early morning in New York? Talk to us a little bit about those drivers.
So I'm in London, first of all. Warm regards to all of you. So yes, indeed, you've called out some of the stats, and they are horrendous. You would talk about it in times where we believe we are living the most peaceful period of the human history. Still, 1 in 3 women would experience abuse in her lifetime. We do see the statistics telling that domestic violence is really the #1 cause of death or disability amongst women aged 15 to 44. Yeah. Even the World Economic Forum, yes, is calling out that we are almost a century away from a true gender parity. And you would ask, we do talk about that. We do see women empowerment really gaining more and more traction in our society. So what is still driving such horrendous statistics? And we do see that we still live in these quite patriarchal social norms where men would hold primary power and really predominate in roles of political leadership, moral authority, social privileges, control of property. We do still see lots of homes where kids are seeing violence on a daily basis, and they believe this is the normal way to exert power. Yeah. And we do still see a poor access to education for women. The community and altogether the legislative environment, it's still poor in creating that safe environment for women. And women are looking for their home to be a safe place. And you called it out, Valerie, that exactly for these women, and especially during the pandemic, home was far from being a safe place. Yeah. So we are still blind to domestic violence and its consequences on our future.
Yeah, it's interesting because, this idea that we accept something as the norm, the way it is. We just happen to be born into a world where that was the norm. If we had happened to be born into a world where women were in positions of power and influence, that would be the norm, right? So in many ways, our task is to help to redefine what norm is. That's just the majority of the humans who were doing something when we got here, right? So you are on the front edge of that, Angela, helping to redefine. And I think one of the things you're saying is what is Avon doing? Because, with Imagine, we work very much with business as leaders, as human beings who can use their powers for good, who show up for tribe humanity and womanity. Tell us a little bit about how Avon is contributing to this and some lessons others might have.
Well, Avon for more than 135 years has truly believed that beauty is the journey while women empowerment is the destination. We truly believe that beauty really comes from inside, and that a lipstick cannot offer color to a woman who hasn't found her voice, or the skincare can't truly repair a bruised soul. So very early in our journey, we've launched our Avon Foundation supporting the women-related causes. And so far, we donated $1.1 billion to breast cancer and domestic violence causes. And now part of Natura & Co, we are part of a beauty group that is not only wishing to create a best beauty proposition, but truly become the best beauty group for the world.
Yeah.
What we are doing, we are tackling the issue threefold. So first of all, speaking out. You just called out, we really need to continue to this kind of forums and every other aspect of life to really speak out that this is an issue and we are all responsible to tackle it. To raise awareness of the violence, abuse in all form, really through the network of our 5 million Avon representatives and millions of customers, also working with legislators, with NGOs, and being part of this event of Peace One Day. Then we are looking to create tangible partnership with NGOs in supporting the victims, supporting the survivors through charities, education campaigns, counseling, really be there when they need us. Yeah. And then our own commercial model. For more than a century, we are sharing our profits with women who are sharing beauty with their friends. We create a provision of microcredit facilities, really creating that economic dimension that will offer them the opportunity to earn and learn at their own choice and gain that financial independence, which is giving them alternatives to a life spent being a victim of domestic violence abuse. We truly believe that a better world for women, it's a better world for all.
Yeah. Beautifully said. You know what else I love about Avon's, as you ended on the commercial model. You started off with where we're giving philanthropically. Yeah. You talked about what you're doing in terms of kind of the enabling environment politically and the partnerships on that. And then you got to the commercial model, where of course you then also build out microcredit and the enabling kind of and support groups around that. Because in many respects, as we would say, any organization is made up of organisms, it's human beings. And your organization is made up of the women and girls who are going to be experiencing this. And I just want to acknowledge that in many ways, Avon has been the leading edge of this kind of conscious capitalism, multi-stakeholder, purpose-driven, is that where you ended up is actually the core of our commercial value and how we create change, create the world we wish to see through our business, which then, of course, enables you to have the ability to influence the broader system around you. So thank you for being a beacon for business in general and what that means on a leading edge there. Yeah.
Thank you, Valerie.
Dr. Najat, can I come to you, Dr. Safety, in your role as Special Representative of the UN on the violence against children, and you've often talked about how children are leading the way. What does that mean when we think about women and children being our greatest hope for peace and sustainability?
Thank you. I just want to remind that since more than 13 years before I became Special Representative, I work very closely with and for vulnerable children, boys and girls, victims of violence, exclusion, discrimination in my native country, Morocco, but more worldwide. And I learned a lot from them, from their experience, from their perspective, for their creativity. And I just want to highlight one big point. For me, the best special expert in the world regarding children's rights are children themselves. And in my work as special representative, I have consistently been emphasizing that the crucial role of children as leaders and agents of change for leadership in building a world just, inclusive, and free from violence through informing, listening, consulting, involving them, amplifying their voices, helping
Yeah.
bridge those voices with decision makers, disseminating child-led initiative, child civic engagement, making aware key stakeholders of this action in order to help channel child participation into influencing change. And I just want to, if you allow me, to really admire children's creativity, resilience, sense of
Yeah.
solidarity. I just also want to highlight some main points and some key examples. Children currently are not waiting for the approval or support by adults to take action.
Yeah.
All over the world, they are organizing and taking action on issues that are important for them. We
Yeah.
see increasing worldwide children activism, children engagement as human rights defender, peace builder. More and more, they are defending, advocating for climate, sustainable development, social justice, equality, equity, combating racism and xenophobia, child protection from all forms of violence. We see increasing national, regional, and sub-regional networks and movement of children. We see increasing involvement of children in different situations of social unrest, protesting against injustice, inequalities all over the world in such and in some countries like Chile, Lebanon, Belarus, and Thailand, for example. In Africa and Asia, young girls were mobilized to protect gender inequalities and avoid early and forced marriage. These young girls, very courageous girls, transgressed pervasive gender norms, as you highlighted, and provided new role models for young girls in the villages. In Malawi, a group of girls helped change the national legislation by uniting voices to outlaw child marriage and other forms of sexual violence. In Guatemala, a group of girls led the process of creating a national violence observatory center to report cases of violence against girls and women. In Indonesia, children are mobilized in combating bullying and cyberbullying. In Colombia, girls were involved in the negotiation of the peace agreement. We have also this wonderful worldwide climate change movement that was held by Greta. We have children in US who were mobilized against arms after school shooting. We have children as peace builder, children promoting education of girls such as Malala, children advocating for children with disability, children on the move, children involved in the de-radicalization of their peer in recovery, and children promoting culture of lawfulness, fighting racism and xenophobia, involved in Black Lives Matter movement. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, we see an increasing engagement and activism of children online and offline to reach the most vulnerable, to provide peer-to-peer counseling, to provide peer-to-peer support, and also to inform, raise awareness, and mobilize, communities and their peers. And this is really important that we need to take into account to have wonderful example. And my mandate is trying really it's not easy because children in many places are not seen as actors, and also children are not duly informed, are not duly listened, are not duly empowered, are not duly protected to express themselves. And we need to make sure that decision makers are really aware of all this action and seeing children as part of solution. And it is why I am currently a special representative, really building a kind of research, collecting all this wonderful child-led initiative and civic engagement worldwide, really to give visibility to that and to advocate more and more strongly to make children voices heard, but
Yeah.
also children being part of the solution. This is our big challenge if we need really to make sure that we are building peaceful, just, inclusive society. And I just want to finalize my point by telling that I hate this slogan, children are the future. Children are not only the future, children are the present, and we need
Yeah.
to invest on them today.
Yeah. Gorgeously said. I could not agree more with you, Dr. Najat. And I think that you have put your finger on something that is a global shift that we all should be waking up to, that children are waking up humanity. I take it at that kind of broad perspective. And one thing, Angela was talking about the kind of norms, right? That we came into the norms and this was this patriarchal society and where power was and how kind of we make and take from the planet and what's okay. And sometimes I find I don't even like to use the word children because it almost in a way puts a hierarchical versus talking with as early humans. These are people who have come in, who have not been patterned by that way, who are saying, hey, how does this thing work? And how does it work for more of us? And that there is a consciousness shift in children. And if I hear the work that we often do within the CEOs and political leaders, and imagine, I cannot tell you how often I hear, I'm doing something different because my child asked it. I think back to a panel we had in Davos a couple of years ago. And it was the CEO of a very large insurance company, Allianz, a guy named Oliver. And he was asked by Gillian Tett, who leads the Financial Times and Moral Money. And she said, why did your company take a stand that you were going to stop insuring coal-fired plants? So protecting for climate, which as we know is a huge driver for peace. And he said, my daughter asked me, Dad, are you proud of everything you do? So there's something about the early humans who have the creativity, the resilience, the solidarity, who embody what we are today. And so how do we empower and lift them up? Thanks for that. Let's come back to that. Can I turn now to Lara and Amine? This is exactly a lot of the work that you're doing, yeah? With the global goals and the World Cup. It's also part of the work that you were doing with What Really Matters and the Congress. Can you talk about that? Talk about what Dr. Najat was saying and how you see that in your work on the ground. And let's talk a little about what others might be able to learn from and potentially emulate. If we take this frame that says the children aren't the future, they're the present, how are we providing the space and place for them to be what they can be for all of us?
Thank you, Valerie. Well, I'd like to start by just giving a little bit of context, if that's okay. Peace has eluded us in the Arab world for many generations. And in the last few years, it has felt harsher and more challenging than before even. But we are also a place where there is great opportunity and great potential. And we need to activate that opportunity and we need to activate that potential. And the only way we can do that is if we include women and girls and children, to go to what Najat, Dr. Najat was saying. At Rise for Good, as you said, Valerie, this is what we try to do. And we do it through multiple different initiatives. One of them is the What Really Matters Congress, which is an inspirational speaker congress for high school kids, where we try to expose them to people from their community and from the region and from the world that have overcome adversity and challenge and found a way through the difficulties. Today, I would really like to highlight one of the initiatives we're most proud of, and that is the Global Goals World Cup. It's a football tournament, but it's an alternative football tournament. It was founded by Megan Gilmartin and VIR Soccer in Denmark. And so far, this tournament has played on, I think, all 5 continents. And we're very proud to host the first Global Goals World Cup in Jordan in October, hopefully live broadcast at the end of October. Now, how is this a different football tournament? Our teams don't just compete on the football field, and they don't just compete for goals in the football field. They compete for actions for the Sustainable Development Goals. We have some 24 teams and 200 women that signed up last December, and they're working on almost all of the goals since we got started, of course, with the pandemic and with delays. We hope we'll still be able to have it in the end of October. But if I can give you an example of some of the things that some of these incredible teams have accomplished. Our teams are all women, by the way, and most of them have never played football before. We have one team that lives in a community in northern Jordan where football is not allowed for women. It was shunned generally by the community. Since December, we've been working very hard locally with the teams, and now we have a team out of this community in Jordan that train 3 times a week, and they will play in the Global Goals World Cup tournament in October. We have another awesome team that have taken credit cards, things that we use every day, and when they're expired, we toss them in the garbage. Well, these teams have found a very creative way to recycle them, and they've turned them into art and jewelry and frames, and in the process have employed women from marginalized communities throughout the country, and in that way also empowered them and given them some economic power as well. So that's a short brief, I guess, about the Global Goals World Cup in Jordan.
Yeah, thanks for that. It seems to me like basically what you have as kind of learnings from others is you start from saying, let's start in our community as well, right? It's on the ground of that.
Absolutely. You start with yourself, right?
Yeah.
We all know this, but sometimes we don't act on it, you know? If we start with changing ourselves, with our own behaviors, then by default, everyone and everything around us will change. And this is actually something that we're already seeing with the Global Goals World Cup tournament in Jordan. And I know if Megan was here, she would be able to tell you about many, many other such stories. The organizations and the foundations and the companies and the banks that these women play in the name of have already started to change their behavior. They've already started to change the way they think and the way they act and how they employ and who they employ. And this is just in a very short time period in the midst of a global economic crisis and a global health crisis. So it's really impressive what women can do, what girls can do, what we all can do if we just take the first steps ourselves. And this is the perfect example of that.
Yeah, well said. And I also think that, you know, when you think about platforms for peace, right, sports and the idea that we can play together, I think about also what Dr. Najat was saying, the creativity and the solidarity and the resilience that comes from this. And so that using the kind of ability to come together in peace, of course, the Olympics are the kind of ideals of this. You think about kind of Athens, democracy, and the idea that we could be in peace together, and then the sports and the games on that. And also just to kind of relate to the conversation about what we were hearing about children, it was interesting to hear that the sports stadiums that were able to kind of go green and sustainable and kind of models for peace on that were sparked by the children of some of the owners on that as well, who then said, this is not the world I want to live in. And we can use this as a platform for what we stand for.
Well, absolutely. Sorry, I was going to say absolutely. And you see that, I mean, it's important that when we try to bring about change and we try to make progress, that it's also joyful, that it's also fun, that it also brings us together. The process of having the teams learn to play football and learning a new skill, doing it as a team, that creates incredibly strong bonds among the players. And that is a huge advantage. And that makes them all the stronger and all the more capable to actually pull off some of these really remarkable actions that they've been pulling off towards the SDGs.
Yeah, beautifully said. A couple key big learnings that all of us can implement. One is it starts with us. Yeah, we stand for, we are the ideal time has come. We stand for a world that works for everybody. And what you say about this being joyful and playful. I mean, you think about people getting up today, oh God, I'm going to hear about women and girls suffering. No, I'm sorry. We got early stage humans who are empowered, who are activated, who are creative, resilient, who are out to change the world. That's pretty fun to think about. How do we love that? How do we create that environment that nurtures and allows that to be? And I think it's a great opportunity for those of us who are holding the space for an idea whose time has come to a world that is where we don't live with gender-based violence, and where the half of us who were born into an avatar like this can live without fear of being in our homes. That's fun work to be a part of that and to call other people into it in that way. And I know, Angela, you were talking about that a little bit as well. Yeah. Geeta, can I come to you, please, to talk a little bit about the work that you did, of course, as founder and director of Ambad, the leading edge work that you did with #UndressFive22, and to hear about that as a model for others, but to think about how can people educate themselves around this? And can you talk about how you guys specifically are doing that and what actions others might be able to take?
Okay. So needless to say that humanitarian emergencies, natural disasters, and global pandemic put refugees, and especially women and children, at increased risk and vulnerability. The current COVID-19 crisis is surely no exception. And generally speaking, the best way to achieve peace everywhere is by simply reducing violence everywhere. So violence against women and children is, we all know that it's one of the most widespread, persistent, and devastating forms of human rights violation in our world today. And it occurs in every country around the world and affect every single house. In Lebanon, though, we lack accurate data about the magnitude of the problem. The data available at the level of civil society organizations, such as Ambad and others, cases reported to the police or reported in the media, showcase that violence is really affecting a large proportion of women and girls and throughout their cycle of lives. Ambad, since it has been founded in 2011, we have been striving to educate, prevent, support survivors, try to shift social norms and policies to ensure gender equality and nonviolence. One of the major achievements of our work was contributing to the endorsement and drafting and endorsement of the National Action Plan on 1325 that has been recently endorsed by the Lebanese government, which is aiming at promoting women, peace and security agenda and the application of the special resolution. Also abolishing the Article 522, which is the mentioned campaign, Undress 522, which is related to abolishing a very disgraceful and shameful article in the penal code, which is marrying your rapist law, that Lebanon, after its repealing, like multiple countries in the MENA region followed. And also recently creating a kind of national wave to promote our 24/7 safe line by launching the campaign Lock Down, Not Lock Up, which was aiming at promoting nationwide solidarity towards women survivors of gender-based violence locked in their houses by mobilizing the neighboring support network and promoting on their balconies solidarity messages and the helpline of the organization, which was like very important to reach out to women and break the isolation and try to send also a message of nonviolence and peace and prioritizing violence as key aspect to save your life, similar to the pandemic
ask you
itself.
The key learnings from that for others to listen to this, right? Because it was a great success, right? It was to link that these aren't separate issues. Nonviolence linked to the pandemic itself. What were the other kind of very concrete steps that you took? If others are thinking, okay, how can I emulate this in my own space?
So first and utmost is like really ensuring that you're listening to survivors. One of the key learning that we had through our journey is like listening and prioritizing and ensuring the voice of the right holders themselves in evaluating the reality, in identifying the needs, in identifying and even defining your tactics and defining what should be done to transform their reality, what will make them feel more safe and protected from their own eyes, from their own perspective. So that was one key learning in our work as Ambad, which was engaging the right holders themselves. That's being in any campaign, advocacy campaign, aiming at making any change in the Lebanese law by itself, or even any kind of education or sensitization campaign to promote messages where the people concerned themselves feel like safe if this is out. So ensuring the no harm is essential and is central in the work in addressing that kind of issue. Make it people-led, right-based approach, survivor-centered approach, and ensure no harm while doing your activism. That is very essential in the work itself. And also like ensuring that you're having a gender-sensitive and holistic and intersectional intervention, meaning not separating the different priorities, because that will jeopardize effectiveness and efficiency and the sustainability of the impact that you might create. So working on violence against women and children issues is not separated from the work on livelihood, on emergency humanitarian response, even on portfolios related to peace and security agenda. The moment where we start, even globally, dividing human rights, which should be undividable, that's the moment where we start compromising the impact and compromising the effectiveness of our intervention. Lastly, maybe I would like also to mention that we should be prioritizing the meaningful participation of women and girls who are working on the front line in the GBV prevention and response, because they have the first-hand experience. And this is something sometimes we lack or we miss, because the program and the strategies are designed on a different front. So they have the kind of right-based approaches, they have the information, they are the one connected to the people. So space should be created for these activists and for girls and other groups to ensure that directly their voice and views are heard. Also, like, one of the learning was innovation. Innovation is key nowadays, and ensuring working with right holders themselves, couples, communities, workplaces, decision makers, schools, faith-based groups, security sectors. They should be like engaged, and we should be working with them to sustain effort to stop violence before it starts, by questioning and addressing like really the different gender social norms in order to promote the principles of human dignity and non-discrimination in really transformative way. And lastly, like investing in people rather than numbers. This is one learning from Lebanon and from the MENA, I would have to say, and apologies for the boldness, but really not acknowledging people's aspirations, potentials, capacities, priorities will not lead us to a brighter future where they need to lead on its building. And this is key. What we need is really an acceleration of action, political will, and an increase in smart data-driven investment, and especially investment in the people themselves. Ending violence against women and children, needless to say, is the right thing to do, and it's a smart investment to make, and it is possible. So we can and must create a world where every single woman and child can thrive in a world free from violence, hatred, and fear. And today is the right moment to do that.
Yeah. And it's the right moment to be bold for it. And you say, sorry to be bold for it. This is an idea of the time to come, and this is a time to speak truth in that. And as you said, to listen to truth in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to bring in, if we have Elwha Elman. Is she able to be with us? Elwha, I know you're joining us from Mogadishu, and the sound and the quality isn't so great. So you're here with us in spirit and sometimes in technology, serving as the Chief Operating Officer at the Elman Peace Center, and of course your work in Somalia together with your mother there, where you're looking at solutions to peace, cultivating leadership and agency, exactly as Yida was saying, among vulnerable groups. You were nominated for the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize and an international activist awardee from the Gleitzman Institute, and advising the Peace Building Fund and UNICEF's Generation Unlimited. If you can hear me, and if not, it starts to become a question that I'm going to bridge onto to Iman as well, and then to all of us. Would love to know, given where we talked about the norms, if you can share solutions and strategies for changing cultural, social, and religious norms that prohibit the education and full empowerment of girls and women to be full and equal participants in the human family. Elwha, can you hear us? And if so, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, can you hear me? I can hear you for now.
Yes, we hear you. Yes, hello? We can hear you. We can hear you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. We'll just have to bear with the technology, and I'll keep my video off, unfortunately, for now. Yes, I mean, the battle for ending sexual and gender-based violence in Somalia is one that we've taken on since just over a decade ago, and at a time where we were facing a terrible humanitarian crisis, a drought and famine that killed nearly 350,000 people, which of course meant women and children in tow became displaced, and we're all rushing to the capital for aid. And that's where we saw that there was a need for the services that we provided, and the impetus behind us founding our first rape crisis center. Our first facility, we were also the first one in the country. And at that time, sexual violence, abduction, harassment, domestic abuse, all of these different things that are happening to women were so rampant that they were not even considered wrong. So when an organization or an entity dared speak out about it, it yielded a press conference from the highest authority in the country at the time, the president, who actually went on the news and said that these kind of things don't happen in Somalia. They are against our culture, against our religion, and any entity that is speaking about these issues is fabricating things to shame the country. And that is why rape is not even considered a crime against the individual in our penal code. It is considered an act against morals, against culture, and shameful. So just a mere 5 years later, we were able to generate a conversation on sexual and gender-based violence that never before existed, had a huge women's movement to develop in Somalia. We went from 11% women political participation in the parliament to 24%, a huge spike, and hoping that more women in political positions would also result in more legislation and legal reform that would not only criminalize sexual violence, but also put in place reforms that would be in favor of women and the girl child. So we honestly have seen a lot of progress, but as we speak today, we are also facing very terrible regress, where the parliament that we have in place now is considering changing the constitution from the age of 18 of a child to 15. They're also citing in the constitution that marriage does not have to be an act that is voluntary between two consulting adults, essentially legalizing forced marriage. We're also introducing an intercourse bill that says that children as young as 8 can be married. So although I recognize that we've come so far in Somalia where the question of does rape happen is not being asked anymore, but now it's more of how do we prevent it and how do we ensure that we punish it through law. That's where the question is now, and that is the silver lining where I see that there is progress, but it is still one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a woman. Just a few days ago, a young girl was gang raped and thrown off a building to her death, and there's no punishment. And what I believe is one of the biggest motivators or reasons why this cycle continues to happen time and time again is because there's no repercussion. There's no deterrent as to why one should not rape. And that is why it's so important that, at least in our view, our philosophy and our theory of change is 3-tiered. 1, providing the individual recovery and service delivery for the people that have been affected. 2, working with communities on education, challenging harmful traditional behaviors that perpetuate the cycles of violence, and redeveloping protection structures for women and girls. And then the 3rd, working on policy and legislation to prevent these things from happening further. So it's a lot has changed in a very short period of time, but right now we know that the effort and the most of our focus that we have to put into place is on the legal apparatus and ensuring that there are unequivocal measures in place in the form of hard law to punish people that commit rape or child abuse or all these other factors, and that's what's missing. And I think in most places in the world, we can see that there's been, globally, even from my experience of working, within UN agencies and international organizations, that there are declarations, recommendations, resolutions, so many commitments to ending violence against women and girls, but very few that through hard law unequivocally punish it. So I'm also very proud to be part of an initiative called Every Woman, which is the first treaty on actually trying to end sexual violence against women and girls through the form of hard law. And right now we're in the process of lobbying for that treaty. But, we have seen some success though. And a lot of the work that we do with boys and men through sports and through community education, whether it's through empowering survivors themselves to reclaim their narrative and rebuild their own lives, whether it's through developing educational materials and disseminating them through schools to try to change perceptions from a very early age. And in Somalia, where the population 78% is under the age of 30. Okay, and of that, 56% is under the age. 78% is under the age of 30, and 56% of that is under the age of 15. This is essentially a nation of children, which gives us great hope that there's still such malleable and developable brains to shift in the right direction, and why youth leadership is essentially so important as well too, to have young people at the helms of changing this narrative.
Yeah. Beautifully said. First of all, thanks for your work. And I'm struck that all of us could have been born into the body of that 8-year-old girl who was raped and thrown off of that building. We just happened to be born into the ones that we're here. And the opportunity that you're doing, as you said, is to work with it at all levels. Yeah, the early humans as well as hard law, and how fast it can change in one direction and or the other. Iman, can you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing in terms of the hard environment, right? What can be done to bring women and children into positions of power and influence? If I think about what your sister was saying, it was also about let's get more women into positions of power and influence in the legislative. You're doing that now as you are the head of planning and security for the Somali National Armed Forces. Tell us about what you see in your personal journey. I'm conscious of time, but I'd love to hear your story if we can in the next 3 minutes or so.
Hi, Valerie. Thank you. When I first enrolled into the Somali Army, I was faced with many challenges to the point where I became so hyper-focused on the negative notion that surrounded and still surrounds today womanhood in Somalia. There is this ridiculously flawed stigma that women are less than men. That women are not as capable, both physically, mentally, or emotionally. And for me, I truly wanted to fundamentally alter people's perception of what women can do, and shift the paradigm towards a shared belief that women should be essential and leading part of the security sector. And I feel that is important, especially for our own country's future. Yet currently, it's almost exclusively male-dominated. Thankfully, today I am one of the senior-ranking female officers, and it is a personal accomplishment that I've been able to succeed. However, as a woman, I know that inclusion of a woman in the security sector is the right thing to do. Especially a government service that is crucial as guaranteeing security and attaining peace itself, should be principally representative by the communities it offers its services to and govern. As a military officer, I also know that gender inclusion has drastically improved our overall operational successes in the field. And that includes by including female soldiers and officers in our operational plans. We've seen the successes of operations significantly increase. Women were able to connect with, connect and build relationships with local communities, especially areas that were predominantly re-liberated areas from Al-Shabaab. We noticed that by having women officers and soldiers included in the units that were liberating these areas, they were easily able to connect and build relationships with these communities, which have really been able to increase our operational successes. It is also just as important for women who've been able to be inclusive, who've managed to work their way up the ladder, to also make it their responsibility or their mission to ensure that they're able to support other women in getting involved into these institutions. For me personally, I mean, it took a lot of challenges. It took a lot of challenges and difficulties for me to get to where I'm at. However, I do strive today to figure out in terms of what I can do in my position as the director of planning in including women and making it more gender inclusive. And a lot of that has been pushing for quotas when it comes to recruitment training. So there's a certain percentage of women seats allocated for them from the beginning, rather than having it be a competition male versus female. As a director of planning, I'm also able to personally include women when it comes to the initial planning phases.
Yeah. Iman, I'm sorry, we have only 2 minutes left for our conversation here, and it's such a rich conversation because each of your life story and the work that you've done and the path that you've taken to both be the change, as you were saying, Iman, to say, can I role model this? Can I be the pioneer? And kind of it starts with us to achieve it in that way. If you're happy to be open to the conversation, people have questions for us, I think all of us are available in terms of our emails and ways to kind of connect offline as we can do. So we have 1 minute to be able to kind of complete on it and our time together. And I think that where we started the conversation in terms of saying this is a global development agenda and that we can't have gender equality and peace without gender equality and addressing the global inequalities, and that it all starts with us, but it's also about changing the norms, everything from providing the soft space for using sports and other kinds of mechanisms to bring people together, or through our businesses, as Avon is embodying as an organization, and was one of the questions we had there, and all the way to hard law. And how do we maintain putting women and girls in position, but bringing boys and men along with us on that? So it's been a rich conversation that I think has both captured the shift that is already happening as we see children, as Lara and Najat also talked about, and as Iman and Elwha have also lived, who at a certain level of consciousness are coming out and being the creative agents, not waiting for action, creativity, resilience, and solidarity that all of us as a human family are here to embody. So I want to thank you, heroines of peace, honor you for who you are and how you're living your life every day. I want to invite everyone, if you're listening to this as a conversation, it's because you care and you are an agent of peace. And I think, as Imagine said, and my co-founder Paul Pullman opened us up earlier, we were going to hear from people who are singing songs, and there's a kind of idea of music as unites the human family. And the song Imagine certainly inspired us as we were looking at the global goals and saying, how can we reduce inequality? So I think I close with the invitation that John and Yoko gave us in that song to say, imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. And I'm so grateful for you heroines, for you dreaming and showing others that you're not the only one, and for all of you who are joining Peace Day and being the change that the world needs for one human family.
Thank you, Valerie.
And thank you all for such an empowering dialogue.